Hello, and thank you for joining us here today for the Most Attractive Employers Index for 2021. My name is Orla Moran, and I am the General Manager of IrishJobs.ie. Compiled by Universum, which is a part of IrishJobs, the ranking represents Ireland's most comprehensive and robust talent survey. Over 10,000 Irish students shared with Universum their perceptions, expectations, and aspirations for their working lives, while also naming their employers of choice. It's fair to say that this year has been a year like no other for all of us. The pandemic has touched every part of our lives, both personally and professionally. It's what makes today's rankings particularly relevant and timely, because the data used to compile the rankings was gathered in the middle of the COVID crisis. We now have data which can show us not only how the pandemic has impacted Gen Z talent, but can also help us identify new talent trends. It's precisely this type of insightful and rich data that you need to shape your future talent acquisition and retention strategies. Joining me today to take us through the rankings, the data, and the trends are Steve Ward, the UK and Ireland Business Director for Universum, Dennis Bilgren and Carolina Aidman, Employer Branding Advisors at Universum, and Sarah Brewer, Marketing Director of IrishJobs.ie. So what can you expect from us over the next 90 minutes? In a moment, I will hand over to Steve and his team. They will take you through the data and reveal some of the key trends they have identified from this year's research. Then we'll move on to the winners. Steve will reveal the 2021 rankings for employers recruiting in business, engineering, IT, natural sciences, and law. We'll also hear from employers who have excelled in this year's ranking and hear how they have achieved such phenomenal results in such challenging times. Every recruiter appreciates the importance of gender equality. So next we will take a deep dive into the data to see what it can tell us about the aspirations of young female talent. If achieving gender equality is a goal for your organization, then these insights will be particularly relevant to you. Finally, we'll wrap up with some key takeaways. Throughout today's webinar, we have a team available on the chat function to answer any questions or queries you might have. You will see the chat box on the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. Steve, it's great to have you and the Universum team here today.
Thanks very much for having us, Orla. And hey, everyone, thanks for joining this. Hopefully it'll be a really interesting, packed 90 minutes or so coming ahead as we go through a bunch of stuff that hopefully helps you have an idea of what Irish talent, future talent is looking for right now. Who are Universum? For those of you who aren't really familiar with Universum, obviously a sister company of IrishJobs. We are the world's leading data-driven and insight-led employer branding agency. We do an enormous amount of talent research, which is what we'll also be covering a little bit today. And we use that research to shape EVP strategy, employer branding strategy, and also creative campaigns out there into the recruitment marketing space as well. So that's a little bit of who Universum are, just to give you a bit of scale of that. We do this in over 40 countries in the world and survey well over 1 million students and professionals every year. So yes, a significant reach for Universum, very much driven by the data we collect on an annual basis. And how many people responded to the Irish one this year? So just to give you the starting point, just over 10,000 students responded to our research this year. What each of these 10,000 students do is complete quite a very in-depth survey that has some all sorts of things about their drivers, what's important to them, what are they looking for in their career, and within that we then also start to look at what are the companies that stand out for them as attractive employers, and so and that's obviously what we'll cover through. But we're really pleased to get a good number this year. It's been a hard year for surveying and collecting data for obvious reasons. People think they're sick to death of filling things in on their phone, but at the same time as well. So we're super appreciative of the Irish audience to be able to give us this much response. So look, let me introduce. So one of the things we want to do next is look at some of the research. So I'm invite my colleagues Carolina and Dennis to join me through this little period, and particularly Carolina, who will run through a lot of this research. What we wanted to do is try and find some of the key stories and the key trends that we're seeing in the way in which people are perceiving the industry right now. So, so over to you, Carolina. You can lead the way with this. If I move on to the first slide, shall I?
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Steve. And as you alluded to, this has been a very dramatic year with a lot of changes, both in terms of which companies that students prefer, but also in terms of what attributes that they prefer when it comes to selecting a future employer. And what I thought would be interesting to start looking into were some of the attributes that have seen the biggest increase and drops compared to last year's research. So what this slide here showcases are the attributes which have gained the most in percentage compared to last year, and the attributes that have dropped the most in attractiveness. And what is quite interesting here is that we see two major changes, or two major narratives basically being played out. So if you start looking at the biggest gainers, right? So we see attributes related to security, stability, safety are strongly on the rise. But we also see attributes related to ethical standards or being more purpose-driven is also increasing alongside the support for gender equality in D&I. So it's really just a testament showcasing that students today are, first of all, seeking that safe harbor and that employer that can guide them throughout this crisis, but also that they want to work for a company which shares their values and their beliefs. And if we instead look at the biggest droppers, or the attributes that have lost in attractiveness across all main fields of studies, we can see on the flip side there that it's more attributes that are perhaps a little bit more the luxury attributes, or attributes that aren't as crucial for the talent. So we see encouraging work-life balance, we have having exciting new products and services, or recognizing performance. All that are important, but perhaps not as crucial as prior to the pandemic. Any thoughts around that, Steve? Again?
I think an interesting reflection regarding that is in the last crisis back in 08-09, attributes that are on the rise this year, support for gender equality, inspiring purpose, commitment to D&I, etc. Those would have been perceived as more of a luxurious items from employers, but also from the talent cohorts. So now 10 years on, seeing that actually, despite being a crisis, despite not that many job opportunities for graduates, to see them on the rise and still value those attributes, it speaks to the fact that we have a new talent cohort now 10 years later, which is really interesting to see.
And I think the point you make, Carolina, about the ones on the right, they're losing in luster. They're not as popular as they were before. But I think the point about them being luxury is correct. I think that's the idea. I think right now, when we step back and think about how we're engaging with talent right now, we have to think about talent's more interested now in what gives them a safe house over their head, what gives them the basic needs. Or, in a pandemic, luxury and all the bells and whistles that are on the right-hand side all of a sudden don't become important in the career. So I think from an advice perspective, I would think about how we communicate to talent. Often in employer branding and recruitment videos and content, we tend to focus on the things on the right more so than some of the things on the left, and therefore I think we need to think about how we forget the aesthetics a little bit, or tone down the aesthetics and focus on the real values we give to employers and safety. So I think it's a very fascinating side of the trend has given us.
Absolutely. And I think if we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more how this dives into the various business groups, or the target groups. So this is the top attributes for business students last year, as well as this year in Ireland. And what we can see here is that the trends that we saw across all main fields of studies are very much present here as well. So we can see the attributes that are more, perhaps the luxurious ones, the encouraging work-life balance, have dropped quite significantly. We can also see flexible working conditions are not even part amongst the top 10 any longer. And they have instead been replaced by secure employment, by professional training and development. And as you can see, leaders who will support my development and competitive base salary. So really turning to attributes that provide that safety, security, stability that we normally perhaps don't see featured so highly. And also, I think what's really interesting is if we look into the bottom part of this slide here, we can see the attributes with the biggest percentage changes, and we see a similar trend there as well. Similarly, if we look into the engineering students, which you just flipped over into, This talent group is, of course, a little bit more focused on perhaps the innovation side of things, like technology or embracing new technology, as you can see. And also here we can see that shift, that secure employment has increased and encouraging work-life balance have dropped. But also similarly there, if we look into the attributes with the biggest percentage point outside of the top 10, we can see a very interesting movement here, that engineering students who usually are very centered around the compensation, the professional training and development aspect, they are increasingly focusing more on the softer aspect. So the attribute which has had the biggest increase compared to last year is actually ethical standards, quickly followed by teamwork, professional training and development, and inspiring leadership. So it is really a shift in movement. And perhaps if we just look into the IT field as well, we can see a similar trend there. So also this IT is also very much tech driven. They prefer innovation, new technologies, career related attributes. But also here we can see a very similar pattern, that the secure employment is on the rise and the we're encouraging work-life balance is dropping. And what is quite interesting here is that embracing new technologies, which usually is featured very, very high, has decreased a lot. And we can discuss a little bit around that, what we think that is. But once again, we can also see that the softer attributes also have an increased attraction point here, as we can see in the bottom part. So I don't know, Dennis, Steve, anything you want to add here as well?
Yeah, I think, the fact you mentioned embracing new tech and innovation is quite interesting, because in the UK, we've seen the opposite trend, where actually innovation decreased quite a lot and embracing new tech replaced that original position. I think we have to, bear in mind how the IT or tech employers are positioning themselves, and perhaps embracing new tech, the VR campaign goggles, it's been watered down almost. So it's been over communicated, a bit too much emphasis on the embracing new tech possibly. And instead they're now shifting focus towards innovation, which kept its fifth position, to say, well, actually, okay, that you're embracing all this tech, but are you innovating? Are you changing up the industry? Are you making, are we paving the way for something new here? So I think it's in the perception of the students who take the survey that actually embracing new tech might have been a bit diluted now, being overused in employer branding campaigns.
And I think this is a field where we all know how hard it is to differentiate ourselves, and how hard it is to attract talent. And I think if you can identify, we're seeing this is a massive shift. As you say, Dennis, what we see in the UK as well as Ireland, two completely different viewpoints from tech talent on, and which therefore tells us so much about how we need to understand different audiences correctly to put a message, particularly when it's super hard to attract, like tech talent are. And here we're seeing, like you say, something completely different. The ethical standards, inspiring purpose, being right at the top, respect for people going in the right, and actually interestingly as well, support for gender equality as well going. So all of those are things that make us start to think about, what do we need to tell next generation of tech talent? What do we need to communicate to set us apart? Look inside your organizations, I would say, for those of you on this call, to work out how do you embrace these factors within your organization, and maybe think about some of these things as part of the communication structure, rather than shiny tech and all that kind of stuff, which maybe, as Dennis absolutely rightly says, has maybe been watered down a little bit by overuse now.
Agree. And I think this becomes even more important if you look into the gender split. So if you look into the next couple of slides, we'll actually see how big the difference is between what female and male talent want. So what we can see here on the left, we have the attributes with the biggest differences across all main fields of studies amongst the male students, and then on the right we have the female target groups. And what we can see here is that if we look at other markets in Europe, the difference between last year and this year is very much colored by an increased sense of responsibility or dedication, or males tend to be even more career focused throughout the crisis, where females tend to be a little bit more centered around the community and around softer aspects. But what's interesting with the Irish data is that we do see some trends of that. We have the career focus there, but it's much more centered around the sense of community. You see the leaders who will support my development, professional training development, but team-oriented work is actually one of the attributes that have increased. So rather than just, looking after myself and my own career, male graduates in Ireland tend to be a little bit more focused on the community and the group, which I think is really nice. Also, we see the ethical standards, inspiring leadership being represented there. Females are a little bit more similar to what we see in other groups, the more people-centered attributes, support for gender equality, ethical standards, that's more aligned with what we see in other markets. And once again, if we break this down by the different main fields of studies again, so if we go to the next slide.
Finding down.
Yeah. Although there are some positive trends where we're seeing male and female students perhaps are looking to, a little bit more similar things. We still see that the difference between what male and female students want and what they prefer is very different. We see the male students here, you can see the top 10 amongst business students is much more centered around the market success, prestige, compensation related attributes, whereas the females are more focused on the international aspect, but also the purpose related attributes. And this is valid if we look at the other main fields of studies as well. So if we look into engineering, which comes next, we can see that being quite prevalent here as well. So the male engineering students are much more centered around new technology, training and development, the compensation piece, whereas the women are once again more focused on the ethical standards. And quite surprisingly here, something that stands out quite a bit from our talent service is the support for gender equality. I think that's great. That's not something we normally see so frequently, or being in the top 10, but I think it's really, really interesting, and will represent some of the companies we see in the top later on as well. But also finally, if we look into just the IT, we can see that the unique attributes for female male talent there are also quite distinct. But what I think is important here is to highlight that secure employment is the second most attractive attribute for female IT talent, and encouraging work-life balance is also much higher for the female segment compared to the male segment. So just besides from these unique attributes, we can also see that the female tech side are much more focused around the flexibility and having employers basically realizing and supporting that. So I think that's really interesting. And it's just once again bringing it back to what you said before, Stephen, Dennis, that it is so important to understand these target audiences and what differentiates them, or what differentiates them, and what sets them apart. Because if you want to attract female tech talent, quite frankly, you can't utilize the same messaging or communication strategy as you would if you wanted to target business students, because they have such different preferences and desires, right?
Definitely, and something that stands out still, throughout the main studies we've looked at and the shift we've seen, high future earnings, a very me-focused attribute is still it's the top in the majority of the fields, combined with a clear path for advancement being featured in their top 10. So despite wanting all of these people-centric, human-centric initiatives, there's still a huge focus on how do I get into the business? What is my trajectory? And what will I earn? Will I make enough to afford a house in whatever city I am in, or an apartment? Will I be able to pay my student debt, etc.? So despite all these human-centric emotional values coming in, there's still a focus on the compensation and the high future earnings. So we can't forget that attribute as well as employers when we go to market, which is fascinating. They want both pieces of the pie, right? It's
yes, everybody wants both pieces of the pie, don't they? But I think it's true, because I think we've seen this over years and years and years. It's always one of the interesting things, though, for employer brand. Again, when thinking about how do you communicate high future earnings, it's a very hard thing to communicate. So I think that's where your point towards clear path for advancement is. Clear path for career is the thing that tells a story. And I think when you think about how you show rewarding journeys through a career, I think that's a good way to do this. We've just got to now do it with a slightly more comfort embracing kind of way of doing it now, whereas before maybe a lot of graduates might have looked for much harder, very unifocused kind of career paths, whereas I think now it's the way we display that is changing. And I think that's it's the thing, and this is the whole point. I mean, for those who aren't aware, what the measurement of these is over 40 different attributes. So there are 40 different layers, and the whole point is never just to look at the number one and number two. It's to understand those other trends that Carolina is sharing here, because those are the things that are influencing the way and the feel in which we should start to bring communications to audiences. So I think it's super fascinating.
And those are also the things that we saw were growing, right? You don't want to spend all your comms budget on a thing that's decreasing in importance.
Yes.
You want to catch the trend early on. And I would just say, I think it's a brilliant point that you made, Steve, about how do you communicate high future earnings without being, straight?
Putting your salary list down, yeah.
And I think, sector, the auditing and accounting sector have been really successful in doing so, to say, hey, come in here in our fast track. At the end, there's a potential partnership, and everyone knows that that's accompanied by a bigger salary. But now they need to add those human touch points, those human elements, because as Carolina's pointed out, it's growing in importance, and it is already in the top 10. So
yeah. And it's something we'll see later on in the industry trends as well, right? So what we're just seeing here as well is, despite what we were saying about, we can go to the next slide, with the differences between what men and female want, what is still quite encouraging and positive is that we see attributes related to D&I or more purpose-related topics are increasing in both female and male students. So that's really encouraging. So that's just basically what we're seeing here, and that's something I think it's important to remember, that all these compensation-related attributes, professional training development is important, but the CSR, the D&I, the ethical standards, that is increasingly becoming important for Generation Z. So important to keep that in mind as well. So if we look into the final piece here, and we're just going to cover this quickly, but it's quite interesting to see how all of these trends and data have impacted the different industries, right? So what we're seeing here are which industries the business students prefer. And just looking at this list, we see it's quite normal, quite traditional what we would see business students being interested in. We see banking, advertising, financial services, and tech, e-commerce. But if we go to the next slide, what I think is really interesting is to see how this breaks down if we break it down by gender, right? Because here we can see a quite big difference. We see the banking industry, fintech, e-commerce, management, and strategy consulting are predominantly attracting male students, whereas the female students are more attracted to advertising or to fashion, media, tourism, and hospitality. And if we actually break down the attributes and we look into the associations that students have of the various industries, you can see that predominantly, as we see here, for example, the banking industry is very much associated to compensation, to prestige, market success, which corresponds with what male students want. So as mentioned, very well moved with the slides here, but we can see these are the top 10 for the banking industry, the associations, what talent out there think about when they think about the banking industry as a whole, right? And you can see it's very much focused on the green and the orange, the compensation and the prestige related attributes. But what I think is really interesting and what we sometimes forget to look at is the differences. So if you look into the right, you can see the biggest changes in the association of the banking industry this year compared to last year. And actually the biggest change is more related around CSR. And it's just a testament to all the work that a lot of the banks are actually doing, because they are really, really strong in communicating what they do from a D&I perspective or from a CSR perspective, but sometimes it doesn't come across in the top 10. But if we look into the biggest movers, we can see that it's actually paying off, which is really positive. Also, if we move to the next slide, what I think is really interesting, I want to hear your thoughts on, Dennis, is the auditing and accounting industry. A quite similar image, very focused on the career aspect, compensation. But when we look into the biggest differences and what attributes that increased from last year to this year, we can see it's much more centered around the people-centered attributes, respect for people and D&I.
And they'll be thrilled to see this. I mean, coming from a year that we've had with the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID, financial crisis, and then as an industry, the big four and the smaller companies, to then be associated to a higher extent with respect for your people, commitment to D&I and corporate social responsibility, I think that's amazing. That shows that not only the employee brand communication, but also the corporate communication has really gone through. And I mean, they'll be stoked to see this.
And finally, I think finally, if we look into the final slide, we just look at the tech companies and how they're being perceived by business students. And quite clearly here, we can see that the quite different set of attributes is much more focused on the innovation side. And as we all know, I think tech companies have dominated the list for the last 5-6 years or even more than so. And it's also interesting to see what are the biggest differences compared to last year in terms of the associations, right? So we can see here, once again, a bit more focused on the market success, stability, security, but also a reason why we see the tech companies still remaining so strong and performing really well across, on the Irish rank, but also globally, right? Because they have that association to innovation, to tech, but also to security, stability, and to the D&I piece.
Oh, well, look, thank you, Carolina and Dennis. That was super interesting. I mean, obviously, we're just showing the surface of some interesting stuff there. I mean, those of you who are on the call and want to find out a bit deeper and maybe things relating to your brand, obviously, you can absolutely do so by catching up with us separately. But thanks both for running through that information. I think we've seen some really interesting trends this year. It's doesn't always move very much year on year, sometimes not in a dramatic way, but this year seeing some really interesting things with Gen Z. So yeah, thanks Carolina. Dennis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're going to look into some the winners. So who are the ones who are performing well, who are the top 10s this year, and who's winning the awards for the most attractive employers in Ireland this year. So I need to welcome on Orla from, who obviously you've met already at the start, and also Sarah Brewer, who is the Group Marketing Director for Saongroup, who are linked to IrishJobs, etc. So good to see you both, and let's look a little bit into who's doing well this year and who's come up the top. So first we're going to look at the business students, but let me just quickly explain how we get to this, because I think this is important. How do we end? So part of the survey, one of the things that we do is we present to the students a number of companies related to the field in which they're going into work and what they're studying, etc. It's usually about 150, 160 companies in most ends. And what we'll say to them is, hey, look, do you recognize who these companies are? And then they'll tick the ones they recognize, and the ones that they don't recognize who they are, they'll not tick, and they'll be disappeared from their survey. And so that allows us to understand the awareness of an organization. And then we say, which ones would you consider working for, which you think are attractive to you? And we ask that question. They tick the ones they think are attractive in organizations, ones they consider working for, and the ones they don't, they cast aside. And then we say, and that usually leaves us with about 25, 26, 27 kind of companies at this point, out of the original kind of 150 or so on the average breakdown. And then we say, right, we want you to now tell us who your ideal employers are. We want you to choose 5. You've got to pick your 5 ideal employers, the ones that you most regard as who you would like to work for. And so they do. And all the 5s, the accumulation of all those top 5s for the 10,000 plus students that we collected, accumulate to create the ideal employer award ranking. So that's how we come to these rankings. So very much chosen by the students through a thought process. So it isn't a very frivolous exercise. It's a very structured exercise that we've been doing for many years. So it's so we know it works well. So look, Sarah, shall we look at the business students first? So the winners of the business students top award. So looking into the top 10 to start with, we'll see here JP Morgan having a little bit of a move in the right direction down there. We see Amazon going in the right direction, which is great. We also see Deloitte standing out amongst the big 4 as going in the right direction compared to this year. So some good positive movements in this, but let's look at the top 3. So in 3rd place this year is Apple. Congratulations, Apple.
Well done, Apple.
2nd place is KPMG. Again, holding their place. Both of these companies holding their places from last year, so no movement in this respect. And the winner is Google. So well done to Google for being the top rated company in terms of business students for 2021. So Google, no super surprises. I think sometimes from Google, they tend to do very well in this year after year, but we are seeing signs that the gap is closing, everyone. So you never know in the future. But wanted to highlight just quickly now, the big 4, it's such a competitive kind of area. We've just heard about some of the changes in the big 4. And the one that has obviously moved in the right direction this year is Deloitte. And so, and any move in the top 10 is a really significant move. And so, so I caught up with Holly Bailey from Deloitte a couple of days ago to catch up on how they feel about doing so well in the rankings this year. So, hey, Holly, good to see you. This is Holly Bailey from Deloitte, and I wanted to bring Holly on to say well done on Deloitte's performance in the Ireland's Most Attractive Awards, Most Attractive Companies Awards this year, as voted for by the students of Ireland, by the future talent. And what we saw, as we just saw just now in the rankings, Deloitte has moved from 6 to 4 this year, which is a significant move in the top 10, probably slightly doing well against some of your competitors as well, which I think is probably happy to you. How does this make Deloitte feel? Is this recognition of some work that you've been doing in this last year?
Thanks, Steve. And yeah, I think it definitely is. Like everyone, I think it's been a crazy year for everyone in the talent space. And this has been a real lift for the team, I think. And really good sort of vindication of all the really hard work that we've been doing. So we're just super grateful for all the students that kind of voted us as, you know, in their top sort of top 5 employers.
Yeah, top 5
and
top 4.
Top 5 sounds more rounded, but top 4. And yeah, really glad that we got the chance to engage with so many of those students on a virtual platform in the last year.
Yeah, you surely did, and certainly made an impact, because and that's also nice. It was nice about these awards. They're voted for by people. It's not opt-in, so they need to recognise you and choose you. So I think that's great news for you guys. Obviously, it's been a bit of a weird year, right? It's been a very strange year with the pandemic and everything. How did Deloitte sort of deal with that? I mean, did it require a bit of pivoting and into the way in which you engage with students? Because clearly you still had a positive impact. So what did you do as a way of changing the ways in which you do things?
Weird year, no kidding. I think at first, if you're in you know, if you're in the business of especially early careers recruitment, it's very focused on those in-person events, in-person engagement, keep in touch events, and we would have had that whole sort of year planned out as of that fateful day of 13th of March 2020. So definitely a huge pivot, and I think there was almost a little bit of a period, which maybe some people can relate to, a little bit of a period of shell shock, and then we kind of realized, okay, let's get cracking, and sort of looked at what was ahead. Looked at, you know, what are the possibilities, how do we kind of change our approach to both our student marketing campaign and those kind of different student touch points, and just really put in a lot of legwork. And I think it was also a very sort of humbling experience, because I think all of us were kind of learning right along with one another, you know, what kind of works, what doesn't, what virtual platform do we do this internship on, what virtual platform do we do these career fairs on, what are the best ways to engage when people are Zoom called out. So it is definitely a bit of a learning journey, but ultimately what's really great about the past year is that there's probably a lot of kind of programs that we've run that we can then, you know, keep as permanent fixtures going forward.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask, actually, in response to that, because I think, is this changing the way now that you look forward? Are you thinking about embracing more virtual engagement? Is it going to be hybrid in the future, do you think, or how do you think it will be this next year?
I'll say I think we're still definitely kind of still figuring it out, but certainly more virtual events or different kinds of events. You know, we would definitely not be so in-person focused, I would say, going forward, mainly because one of the huge business priorities for us over the past year has been, you know, inclusive hiring. Right. And what the pandemic has really allowed us to do, which is, I suppose, a silver lining, is that particularly keeping in mind our virtual kind of programs over the summer, it's really allowed us to open up a lot of those virtual programs and webinars to a much wider sort of cohort of students, and it's not kind of, you're not tied to a specific location, a specific uni. So we've really been able to connect with students on a kind of wider scale, and that's certainly something we would be wanting to keep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, no, that's right, and I think that's a really good story through all of this, isn't it? Because particularly when you're an organisation the size of Deloitte and the stature of Deloitte, there is sometimes that fear for certain students as to whether they feel they can approach an organisation, apply, and feel as though they're worthy. So actually, one of the things we've certainly noticed is that digital events just break down so many of those barriers, don't they, in relation to the awkwardness of face-to-face and all of the things that come with being a little bit awkward at a careers fair. You can eliminate some of that and share some of the best of Deloitte with them as well, which is I guess an upside too. So look, brilliant to catch up with you. well done on a really good achievement this year. It's lovely to see that movement in the right direction for Deloitte, and as we go through this year, we'll see how you do the professionals as well later in the year, see how that comes out, and then good luck for the year ahead with regard to the student programs, and hopefully we've learned a lot from this year that can make you even better going forward. So thanks for coming and joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Harley. Back to me, everyone. Sorry, I'm just to go back to sharing screen again. Here we go. So that's the top. So good, well done to Deloitte. That was nice, wasn't it, Orla and Sarah? I think she was pleased.
She definitely was pleased. Yeah, for sure.
Sounds like a very busy lady as well.
I know. Do you kind of feel for everybody in this last year as well? Everything's just tipped on the head, and so I always think anybody who's done really, really well and still managed to keep the engagement of students, I think, is incredible. So I think all the stories we have around this are fantastic. Talking of movements, so one thing we want to look at in one or two of the categories here is the movers and shakers, as we're calling them, the ones who are making a real big impact up the rankings this year as well. So we've seen the top 10, but this again amongst business students. What we see here is, so at the top there, we see Pfizer making a big move in the business rankings. What a surprise. I don't know if you've heard of Pfizer this year at all, but they've clearly done very, very well this year in that big jump there. Johnson & Johnson on a sort of similar theme, jumping to 39 to 27. Musgrave Group, which is fantastic, 42 up to 29 this year, and the HSC as well, moving in the right direction with business students, whether it might be always associated with health and medicine side. Business students want to go and work for the health service as well, which is fantastic. So thoughts, Orla and Sarah, on some of these kind of interesting movers?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see Musgraves move up the ranks with the business graduates, Steve. Being the parent company, obviously, to SuperValu and Centra, they have a very solid graduate program and are doing a lot in the space of building sustainable communities through their initiatives such as Tidy Towns, the GAA, autism-friendly shopping, etc. So it's not a surprise that they've moved into the top 30, and they do appear to be the only food retailer, interestingly enough, in the top 30 with business students. So definitely one to watch for next year for sure.
Yeah, and I think just looking at Pfizer there, like they announced a €300 million investment in Ireland last year. So they're a huge employer already, and they employ over 4,000 people here in Ireland. But I think generally, if you look at the industry sectors here, I think it's a really interesting time for the HSE and pharma companies, because everybody is watching these companies. They're watching them, they're reading about them, and they're really paying a lot more attention to them. So perhaps it's a time for these organizations maybe to redefine what they stand for. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is a great opportunity. You're absolutely right, because this is telling us that they're highly visible and highly appreciated. I think that's the other thing. And we always say, well, strike when the iron is hot and all that kind of stuff around branding and timing and all that kind of stuff. And you're absolutely right. I think that's really good advice, because I think right now, these people are appreciated. That's a positive thing. So no, good stuff. And like I say, good to see this little theme, isn't it? That we pick out these big growth here, the theme of how the pandemic winners, effectively, the people who, or the pandemic saviors, effectively, the people. I can definitely vouch for the fact that the people who have been supplying the food during the pandemic are definitely the healthcare. Yes, all very good and nice. Thank you very much. But the food, that's super, super important. So I'm glad that it's exactly the same here in the UK, that the food companies have done well, because we've kind of depended on them this year.
I think my lunch money is definitely being spent up in SuperValu most evenings.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to engineering students. So this is what the top 10 most attractive employers from the viewpoint of engineering students in Ireland. So the top 10 are, well, we see a flashing one at the bottom there, which we'll address in a minute, which is Stryker jumping into the charts at number 10, which is fantastic. Recognition of who they are as an employer in Ireland, and absolutely deserved adding to our research. A few movements up there. Arrow have done very, very well up the journey, as you can see there, which is really, really good. A few companies have dropped, and we'll see why in a second, because as we go into the top 3, so the third place is Boston Scientific, which was number 2 last year. So well done to Boston Scientific, but it dropped slightly because it's been a funny year. And the funny year has meant that number 2 is Pfizer jumping. Now they've jumped 6 places to jump into number 2 this year, from 8th last year into 2. So as I alluded to with the business, any move in the top 10 is a good move. Anything more than 2 is a really top move. And so I think, again, very much representative of what Pfizer has stood for generally in this last year, but as you say, all a massive investment in Ireland as well, which can make them more visible and more appreciated. But who's the winner? Who's the winner of the Engineering Students Awards? Well, it's that company Google again. Well done to Google. Let me say though, although we haven't got a Google interview today actually, but talking to Google quite often, they do always they never rest on their laurels, Google. There's a reason why Google are always at the top. They'd never ever go, we're just at Google, we're the best. They're always looking each year on year, which is why they remain continually attractive. There's no kind of taking the foot off the gas with Google. But look, we want one more interview we've got now, and one of the obviously striking ones there, no pun intended, was the jump into the top 10 with Stryker. So I caught up with Stryker last week to find out how they thought about their success. So hi Eileen, well done. I wanted to bring you on to talk about the success of Stryker. So well done to Stryker for being in the top 10 in the engineering students survey this year as one of the most attractive employers in Ireland, which is a great entry into our Universum charts this year. How does that make Stryker feel about, given what a tough year it's been? Is that something that's super pleasing to Stryker?
Yes, absolutely. We are so thankful to be recognised. I suppose we like to be seen as a career destination, especially for graduates and for young professionals. And we've really always focused on growth and development. And I suppose hearing how our mission, which is to help make healthcare better, has made an impact with students in Ireland is absolutely fantastic. The talent attraction team in Stryker and our leadership team for Ireland are really passionate about supporting academic hiring. We have a big co-op program every year, take in about 90+ students from across Ireland. And we also have a number of different graduate programs as well, which have been really successful for us, and we've got a good reputation. So it's absolutely brilliant. We're delighted to see that that it's been recognised. So that's great.
Yeah, brilliant. And that resonates a lot with some of the new information that we've been seeing as well around what people look for in an employer. So that's really, really good around ethical standards, good purpose, purpose-driven stuff. So we're seeing that comes through loud and clear in Stryker, which is great. Obviously, it's been a really weird year for student engagement. I mean, obviously, this is the voice of students, and students obviously still see Stryker as a super attractive organisation, which is fantastic. But what are the adjustments you've had to do in this last year to meet the differing needs of engagement with students, given the pandemic?
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenge. I suppose every year, Stryker, we go around to about 10+ colleges around Ireland over the course of 1 week. And we call it our graduate roadshow. And it's primarily there to promote our grad programs, but also it's a great opportunity to increase our visibility on the campus and to showcase our products and to interact with students and answer any questions that they have. So obviously, like everybody else in 2020, we had to adapt our strategy to the virtual world. And it was really successful. In many colleges, we had increased attendance. There was some amazing interactions between the students and our engineering managers from across our Stryker sites in Ireland. We also got to participate in some brilliant career fairs, which were hosted by the colleges, and again, more interaction with the student population there. But our engineers in Stryker love the college career roadshows because they all go back to their alma mater and they're able to kind of sell a good story about Stryker, which is great. Yeah. Also, I suppose, despite the economic downturn due to COVID-19, Stryker was always very committed to continuing with our grad program, and the hiring strategy for that continued as normal. We had around 900 applications, which is brilliant, and we have 15 of those graduates going to be starting now in September. But we also, through that funnel, are able to take a lot of applications from that into some of our other open positions across Ireland as well. Another challenge and some consideration that we've given to is that whole onboarding piece, and managers have really worked on how do we engage with people when they join in this new kind of virtual world. And it's particularly challenging, right, for students and co-ops, even when they're joining, because oftentimes it's very much their first experience of working. So now they have to work in a virtual world. But I do think, I suppose, I think COVID has really, brought to the forefront, it's very front facing, how critical it is to have a strong healthcare system.
Yeah.
And I think that's really resonated with students and, with everybody kind of across the globe, like what can I do? What part can I play in this?
Yeah.
And, Striker's mission is very much about, making healthcare better, improving patients' lives. And I think we see that through as well in the traffic. If somebody's looking to make a difference to somebody's life, then you couldn't find a better place than Striker.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. You've absolutely captured the mood that we've seen around the need, and companies who are supporting the pandemic and supporting healthcare are definitely raising in popularity, and that's good to see in many ways, isn't it? Because I think it also demonstrates that the Gen Z community that are coming in have also coming in with a strong heart and as well. So I think no, lovely stories, and I think there's lots of good things for everybody to learn there around being agile and switching to the virtual, and actually the benefits it's created as well. So I think that's really good to hear as well, because it opens the net wider, doesn't it? And I see your diversity inclusion kind of thing behind you, but of course that's I think that's been a positive, hasn't it, through this period as well, the ability to open the door to wider.
Hugely. I mean, from a strategic standpoint, how you view location of where somebody's living, it's have the same impact. Before, unless you were physically in Ireland and able to come on site and interview, there's a challenge. Whereas now it's like, you're in Australia, okay, it's a time difference, but let's make it happen.
You're the best person for the job. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think this is what's made it fascinating now.
Yeah, so it's definitely, it's definitely had its benefits. It's challenged us in TA about re-looking at our strategy, but engaging with students is it's foremost in our mind all the time. We're very, very passionate about that side of our strategy, and all of the team in TA, and as I said, the senior leadership team in Ireland are very, very focused on our academic hiring. It's something we absolutely love doing.
Great stuff. Well, I think it's always a great strategy. You always have to see to the future. So I think it's you always have to influence the next generation about your organisation. So, well, look, thank you, Eileen, for your time. Brilliant to see Striker doing so well up there in the rankings, and good luck for the year ahead. I imagine the next kind of graduate program will probably even look slightly different again to last year as it evolves. But good luck for the next year, and thanks for joining us for this quick chat.
Brilliant, and thanks for the award. Thanks, Stephen. Bye.
Bye.
Go back to sharing screen again. This is there we go. That was really weird then when she said goodbye, Stephen. I nearly said goodbye actually in real life. You forget this is pre-recorded. But at the same time as well, I think what we love from this, and I think what the rise of Striker, not just Striker in that top 10 as well, but if you look at Pfizer as well and within this, and maybe even Arab, I can't comment really, but the things that Carolina shared earlier about engineering students looking for better ethics, better purpose-driven and organizations, it's therefore reflecting in the rankings, because actually then the companies who are predominantly displaying this, that's not to say the other companies aren't, but clearly companies who have a clear message around this of being more attractive engineering students. And maybe it's very much that shift that that Carolina was referring to earlier in the research around what engineering people maybe look for 10 years ago versus what they look for now. I don't know whether you agree with that, but
yeah, it's very evident in the top 10, isn't it, Steve, in terms of those organizations who are very purpose-led or purpose-driven, and they're really outperforming competitors and other organizations for engineers. It's certainly evident there.
Sure does.
And Eileen's a great advocate for Striker, isn't she?
Mm.
Yeah, she still is, isn't she? She was brilliant.
Yeah.
Love having those on. So let's look at the movers. Oops, saying that, I need to press a button. Here we go. So here's the ones, the movers and shakers in engineering. We see EIR, I think you say it properly, don't you?
Air.
Sorry. Air has gone up from 47 to 32, really good move. Enterprise Ireland, what a magic move for those guys as well, 54 to 38. Regeneron jumping in at 27 with engineering, and Medtronic jumping in even higher as well. Another one, rather like Stryker, have jumped into our rankings this year. Comments on what we see there amongst the rising stars in this group?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see Air move up considerably from 47 to 32nd place. It's quite remarkable. They do seem to be striking a chord with graduates at the moment, and what we've been talking about throughout the webinar, they've been largely focused on diversity and inclusion in terms of a lot of their comms. They've a very prominent female CEO, Carolyn Lennon, and she's been championing Air's support of LGBTQ employees, closing the gender pay gap at Air. And of course, they've been a long-standing supporter of the Special Olympics as well, I think for over 25 years. So they really are championing that D&I message. So it's obviously resonating with graduates at the moment.
And then I suppose what we're seeing again is the strong movement up the rankings from pharma companies. So we're seeing Regeneron and Medtronic. So Regeneron have been in Limerick since 2014, and another really large employer in that region. They've 1,400 people at their facility in Raheen employed. They also have a facility in New York that they had to, I believe, ramp up cohort efforts for. So that meant that the knock-on effect then in Limerick meant they had to increase capacity here, which was good news, very good news for the region.
Yeah.
Medtronic, they have played a critical role as well throughout COVID-19. They actually produce ventilators. So my understanding is that pre-COVID, they were manufacturing about 150 ventilators a week in Galway. And then at the end of June last year, they ramped that up to over 1,000. So, these companies doing wonderful things to help with COVID-19 efforts. And then if we look at Enterprise Ireland, I think this is one where I think Sarah and I both, we were kind of at I won't say a loss for words, but neither of us really could explain it. So I went on to the reviews for Enterprise Ireland onto IrishJobs. So what seemed to be the trend was that graduates really liked working for Enterprise Ireland because they had the opportunity to work with a mix of companies. So they weren't just working for one specific industry sector. So that seemed to be the trend on the review section on IrishJobs. Another one which I thought might be appealing as well was seemingly they do a very good fry up in the canteen. So
I'm there.
Yeah, so that was on one of the reviews. So I'd say the people who are working from home in Enterprise Ireland can't wait to get back into the office.
Yeah, that is a real downside of working from home, isn't it? Missing out on the canteens and stuff in these organisations.
Yeah,
and this is, I think it's a demonstration as well. I think sometimes there are different. Sometimes people put a different push on graduate engagement, and we don't necessarily know specifically what it is around Enterprise Ireland this year, but it demonstrates, and we notice it with a lot of conversations with our customers around the fact a specific push in a given year, or indeed conversely, a foot off the gas moment in a given has a massive effect on appreciation with students, because remember, students don't have the broad awareness of the workplace. They haven't got the, they're not tired from having worked in the industry for 10 years. So they're very much influenced by the actions that organizations do in engaging with them and that student environment, whether it be through the virtual fairs we've heard about, whether it be through targeted advertising, etc., for graduate jobs, or whether it be on the careers fair. So I think it probably, maybe it's just something that they've just done this year. It's really resonated, and I think that's it shows that it's worth it. The student engagement, it's well worth doing. And as we mentioned earlier in the Stryker interview, it's also about how you influence them, influencing the next generation into the workplace as to who is a key employee, even if you don't intend to employ loads of them straight away. So I think it's good work from these people that clearly they're having that positive effect.
And what's also really nice to see as well, Steve, it's not just Dublin companies as well.
Yeah.
You've got Stryker in Cork and Regeneron in Limerick and Medtronic in Galway. So I think that's lovely to see that mix.
And maybe another thing as well. One of the things, and you guys might be a bit more aware of it than us in Ireland, but it's also, but certainly one of the things we saw in the UK data was more people moving away from the big city employment and more into low, because they didn't want to go traveling, they didn't want to go commuting anymore. They wanted to be close to family and closer to. Do you think there's been a trend of that in Ireland as well? Is that fair?
For sure there has, but specifically since COVID happened,
Yeah.
people would have moved back to their hometowns or home villages to work from home
Yeah.
there. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when organizations start to open back up again and offices open back up again. Will they look to get their staff back full time, or will it be hybrid working, which is obviously a very hot topic at the moment?
Yeah.
But yeah, we've certainly seen that in Ireland, Steve.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to tech. Now here's it's always a fun one. So look, here's the top. Jumping into these, so Activision Blizzard has jumped into the top 10, so well done to Activision Blizzard. No surprise that a gaming company does well during the pandemic. I think that's probably fair across all markets, that the gaming companies have done pretty well. I think I can't imagine what people have been doing whilst they've been locked in at home. Little movements across the top there, not dramatic ones. And then as we move into the top 3, we see Apple coming in at number 3, which is also the same as last year. Well done to Apple. Coming in at number 2 is Microsoft, which is also the same as last year. And then at number 1, we have, no surprise in tech really, Google again. So well done to Google. We probably should have got Google on for an interview, really, shouldn't we? They keep popping up, but obviously again we know same message as before, really. Google work really hard at this stuff and continue to, but good to see something different like Activision Blizzard coming into the top 10 there. So well done to Google and all of those who are in the top 10. Fantastic work. So let's see on our movers and shakers. This is the last one we've got, movers and shakers, on of the groups that we're doing. So JP Morgan, we see a couple of things there with banks. JP Morgan and Bank of Ireland both making good moves in the rankings this year, which is very good. We see the police, the Irish police, making a big jump this year. I'll get your thoughts on that in a second. And no real surprises, again, that Pfizer is another big jumper. But I think this is what this demonstrates is, and again, going back to your point, Orla, about the opportunity is ripe, effectively, for organizations. Pfizer, what this demonstrates is that good brand appeal, good brand messaging out to these audiences has an impact on all areas of talent. You know, it's not just about associating Pfizer with health and medicine. It's this is tech people. Tech people want to go and work for Pfizer. Now that's a big statement in itself. But yeah, it'd be interesting your thoughts on those movers.
Yeah, I have to say we were quite surprised looking at our Garda Síochána moving up so highly. It's very interesting, I have to say. I'd imagine it's probably a mix of the role they played throughout the pandemic in communities, but also a strong recruitment drive for IT graduates in the space of cybersecurity too, I would imagine. So it's definitely one to watch for next year. Probably worth noting this wasn't conducted when the cyber attack happened of the HSE in the last couple of weeks, so it might change next year, but no, very interesting to see them moving up so significantly.
Did you notice the way Steve didn't pronounce An Garda Síochána? He said the Irish police. So yeah, if they're on the list next year, we'll make you say it.
Yeah, I politely sidestepped that one.
You did. So yeah, look, we see Pfizer again making the great gains. So they've appeared on the business as well as the tech list. Really nice to see JP Morgan as well feature here, because they set up their tech hub here, their first tech hub outside of the US. They chose Dublin as their location. So really nice to see them being, I suppose, making such gains on the list. So they've got a really specialized unit here in Dublin, and I believe the team that are based here in Dublin are working on like blockchain, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence. So real expertise in their hub here in Dublin.
Yeah, very good. And I think, and actually, I think if we remember the scan of the whole of the sort of top 100 list or whatever it was here, banks generally did well actually as well. So I think it's, I think there's a number of examples really where banks are really resonating with tech talent, and lot, and I think that's JP Morgan is probably the most significant representation of that, I think, in the list. You're absolutely right, but it's an interesting thing to see the the thing about the police, the cybersecurity. Yeah, it seems to be. We found the same in the UK as well, that both the police and the Secret Intelligence Service, et cetera, the idea of working in cybersecurity for around this area is it's clearly popular right now, and because that's a big jump in tech. That is a big 33 to 18. I'd be interested to see if that does keep going next year, but maybe if they just stay outside the top 10, then I don't have to say their name. Yeah, I'm all for them being 11th next year. It would still be a great rise. Okay, lovely. Let's move on to natural sciences students. So here's an interesting kind of route here. Now we just got the top. There's no movers and shakers this one, so we're just going to look at the top 10 here in this one. So I welcome your thoughts, Orla and Sarah, as we go through this. But so here is our top 10, or the lower reaches of our top 10. So we can see actually some quite good movements here as well. Department of Education making a really good jump. Regeneron, back to your story earlier, Orla, about Regeneron's developments in the last year. They were added to our list and jumped straight in at 7, so significant work from those guys. No surprise on the jump of the HSC as well. Health Service doing so well too, so that's great. But let's look at the top 3, shall we? So in number 3 is Boston Scientific, so well done to Boston Scientific, although they were number 2, rather like the other one earlier. They were I think it was engineering, wasn't it? They were number 2 last year and 3 this year. Still great achievement. Johnson & Johnson are number 2, and they've jumped a position. So they've actually swapped places with Boston in the order. So well done to Johnson & Johnson for stepping in there. And the number 1 with natural science, which actually was the number 1 last year as well, and we've kind of covered them a little bit today already, but is Pfizer, and no surprise that they remain number 1. So well done again to Pfizer.
Yeah, well done, everybody.
Yeah,
really good. Any other thoughts on anything else that's there? I mean, is there anything that stands out for you guys? I know we've mentioned Regeneron already, so we don't need to cover that. But Department for Education, I mean, is there a reason why you think they're jumping into the top 10?
I suppose maybe graduates feel that they're contributing to Ireland's social, maybe cultural and economic development, I would say. That's feeling on that one. Is there any list that Google doesn't make? So this is the natural science. It's
they're not number 1. They're not number 1 in this occasion.
And going backwards. Come on, Google, pick up your socks. Yeah, maybe this was a year where in science, Google probably weren't the most significant company in science last year. It's probably fair to say, although I'm sure someone in Google will tell me, no, we did some amazing stuff there. Of course they will. Well, let's move on to health and medicine in a very sort of similar sort of field here, but this is slightly more in the sort of deep medicine research and medical side. So top 10. So we're seeing here again a few movements, and you'll also see a number of new additions to this year. So we kind of added and brought some new companies into the research in the last year, which has then added to their this list and really made some movements in this list. You can see some of these companies I don't know so well. You guys may be doing more, but there's some really good moves in there from the likes of Layer Healthcare and VHI. They companies you would expect to be in this area.
No, it's interesting to see them new into the top 10 this year, Steve. Obviously, it's probably pandemic related, of course, but they were quite good as well in the pandemic when they handed over the private hospitals to the HSC to use at the height of the first lockdown. And actually, they gave money back to their customers as well and their members. So they've done quite well in terms of positive comms in the market. So interesting to see them into the top 10.
Yeah, I know. Certainly, we use VHI in IrishJobs, and they've been fantastic. They've come on and provided staff, with mental health seminars and just really good sessions on how to cope with working from home and kind of managing your stress levels throughout COVID. So I think, as well as Sarah said, providing kind of money back vouchers. I think I got 25 euros in the post back a while ago. That again, they're doing their part in this pandemic.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, that's good to hear. Good to hear. So let's look at the top 3. So we've got Johnson & Johnson, who have gone up one. They were number 4 last year, so a good jump for those guys. So well done, Johnson & Johnson again. Positive for them this year. Second place is Pfizer. Pfizer stayed at number 2. They were actually number 2 last year, but what I will say is their percentage of choices in the top 5 grew, so they did grow in percentage, but they can't possibly beat the HSC at the top of this audit. HSC, so well done to health service executives.
Absolutely.
No doubt providing a pretty essential service in the last year, I think it's fair to say.
That's great to see them in number 1.
And I think particularly with the recent cyber attack, I think everybody, your heart just went out to them. It was absolutely just the worst thing that could happen to everybody after kind of the last 18-month slog that they've put in for the Irish nation. So really good to see them here at number 1.
It's great.
Yeah,
really great.
And they also, I'll say it was over 70% of health and medicine students put them in their top 5. So that gives you a real good idea of how significant they are at the top of the rankings there, which very much mirrors what exactly happened for us in the UK as well with regard to the NHS over there. So it's I think we know where the stories lay this year. So really well done. Okay, next one is our humanities and socials. This is quite a wide range, and sort of, I guess it takes in the less pure academic kind of subjects, a number of subjects that are more around social sciences, etc., but it also includes the likes of education and a number of other areas as well. So it's quite a broad cohort, this one. So I find that this was kind of fascinating one, and often one will give us quite good movement in the top 10. So let's have a look, because I'm dug myself a hole. Let's see if that's absolutely true. So there we go. There's the top 10. So we see the first mention of Twitter as they've jumped into the top 10 in this grouping. Microsoft have done well. Aer Lingus, in a year where airlines have probably had it pretty tough as any organization or any industry has. Good to see them go up this year. So we see the police go in the right direction again. Notice I didn't say it again. The civil service, which is great. Any observations from that grouping before we go into the top 10 as interesting one? Aer Lingus probably.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Steve. It's a really strange one that Aer Lingus has moved up 2 points. Delighted for them for the year, given the year that they've had. But it'll be interesting to see how they perform now in next year's rankings as well. But for an airline that was largely grounded for the last 18 months, it's quite interesting that they've moved up.
Yeah, sending the right messages out there, I guess. That's the important thing. We saw the same in the UK with British Airways, by the way, as well. Very unexpected, and the same thing. So really kind of makes you feel good, doesn't it? So some of them are still retaining popularity, and sometimes brand equity comes into this. We find that a certain amount of brand equity and also a kind of the support of Indigenous organisations, local organisations effectively can often have a bearing on this as well when they go through a pandemic, and there's almost like a care piece goes out that kind of says, look, I still back the company even though they've probably had a pretty sore
hard time.
That's true. And I think if you remember back in March when we couldn't get our PPE gear and they were buying all the wrong PPE, and Aer Lingus sent their long haul pilots over to China to pick it up. Do you remember that moment back in March? I think that was a really strong kind of pandemic message to the Irish people as well, that they were rowing in to do what they could, even though they weren't flying people on their holidays.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's always said is that it's the response to something like a crisis that brings out the best or sometimes the worst in an organisation. And I think that's hopefully it's demonstration that it's brought out the best in some of these organisations. Let's look at the top 3. So number 3, going back to your thing, no, then they're always in the list somewhere. So it's Google at number 3 there. At number 2, Google went down 1 actually, by the way, and RTE went up 1. So well done to RTE for jumping into the top 2 in this. But the winners in this area, and very much representative of teaching being in this kind of grouping, the Department of Education and Skills, stay at number 1 as they were last year within this grouping. So well done to the Department of Education and Skills. I suppose that's no surprise given the teaching cohort that exists within humanities and social, and the desire for people to go into teaching. Any observations on those 3 from the 3 of you? RTE jumping up, is there any kind of obvious sign on that one?
It kind of baffles us, really, doesn't it, Orla?
I think that, you know what, it's nice to see public sector appearing on the list, isn't it? Because I think, like, sometimes the brightest and the best candidates don't always consider working for a public sector organization. So, you know, appearing on the list like this can hopefully maybe kind of stir other people into maybe looking at their employer branding or their perception as an employer. So yeah.
But I think as well, actually, one of the things we notice consistently in Universum is it's surprising actually how many more students want to go into public sector than we probably would have anticipated from sort of like the outside looking in effectively. Ironically, we see a lot of examples of this across, you know, all countries, and we see it in certain reaches as well as the Irish ranking side. So I think we sometimes underestimate, I think, and again, message to the public sector organizations maybe watching and looking at this, there's always some strong messages that come out. And if you look back earlier at some of the reasons of the sort of things that students favor the most from employers, actually this is where often public sector organizations come to their strength around purpose, service driven, and often security as well.
Security, yeah, it's a big one.
Security,
yeah,
for sure.
So I think, I think it's brilliant in that respect. And I guess the RTE versus Google, I guess just this year, RTE just was slightly more attractive than Google this year for whatever reason. So well done to RTE for obviously getting the right message out there in this last year to the students.
We're all watching more TV in lockdown, I'd say, Steve. That's probably why.
Yeah.
Or we might have noticed that playing games and watching TV and buying things from the stores that Musgrave own. Okay, so and the final of the top 10 list is the law students list. So this is the top 10 for this particular grouping, and you can see a few static movements here, not lots and lots of movements here. William Fry going in the right direction, which is great for them. But if I jump into the top 3, we see in third place we see the public sector come to the top again, really there with the Department of Justice and Equality. You know, for folks who want to go down that kind of serving society kind of route of law, which is obviously one of the reasons people go into law. So that's the number 3, which I can see is the same as it was last year. Number 2, Arthur Cox. They were number 1 last year. So it means we've got a new winner this year at the top of it, which is A&L Goodbody. So well done to A&L Goodbody as being the most attractive organisation for Irish law students this year, which I think is probably quite nice for a law firm to be in, actually. And it's not normally the case, actually. So it's a bit of a difference in Ireland with Arthur Cox and A&L Goodbody. So any comments on that particular, anything that stands out for you guys there?
Do you know what was interesting for me was, and I didn't realise at A&L Goodbody, seemingly you don't have to have studied law to be accepted onto their graduate programme. I never realised that, which is...
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really good.
Is it because they've got a training programme to do it? Is that how they...
Well, they have, I think they have a number of different programs. I think they could have up to 4 different graduate programs. So that could have something to do with it as well.
Particularly, I think one of the things we've noticed as well is law firms trying to aim for a slightly more diverse way of thinking and mindset. And I think, we're seeing more examples of that where they're going beyond the traditional routes of bringing people into law, but we're also looking at people from other studies. So yeah, absolutely, gets other thoughts and minds into the process. So very fascinating. Very good. Cool. Well, look, that's I'm going to go next through the kind of winners with female talent, etc. Thanks for Orla and Sarah for joining me through that little top 10 routes there, and appreciate your insights on that and knowledge of the market. It's been fantastic.
And well done again to all the winners as well. Thanks, Steve.
Big deal of us. Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure. Yeah, so what we just wanted to do for this last little portion of the session here is just look at some of the, because our research is broken down both by male versus female. So I wanted to look at some of the, as you saw from Carolina's research earlier, and so what I wanted to maybe share, just because as a matter of interest for folk, is also what companies that are performing well amongst female talent. So if I just jump onto the next stage here, so we can just see as an overview here, and we will be sharing, I'm sure in the Q&A somebody's probably asked this during the session, we will be sharing the deck afterwards, so there's a lot for you to consume afterwards, including all the top 100s and top 50s, etc. as well.
so that you've got the full lists afterwards. But just to demonstrate so some of the differences that we kind of see here. So these are the companies that are doing well amongst female talent. Some similarities, obviously, but you can also see some little differences. For example, we had Stryker on earlier, who talked a lot around diversity and inclusion, and very much an inclusive hiring environment. And what do you know, there where we saw them as 10th in the overall ranking, they're actually 5th in the female ranking. So a real recognition of companies that are doing really good stuff in that area, how well they're performing in these. So these are more of us just to scan over, but I've got some interesting things here already. But you can see Google. So Google does very, very strong with female talents as well. And you can see also Apple, etc. do as well. But you can also see in business, other companies come to the fore, like L'Oreal jumps in to the top 10 in that particular grouping. And I think as well, I think Amazon is also a little bit of a rise. Also, some similarities. And here you can see as well in natural sciences, health and medicine and law. Again, for you guys to sort of scan over and look at afterwards, really. But we see some slight differences as well across there. But not noticeably on the right-hand side, with the one that we just looked at in law, the Department for Justice jumps from 3rd to 1st with female talents as well. So very, very fascinating there. That again, female law talent may be leaning more towards the sort of society support element of law. And we also see on the left-hand side, in the middle there, the VHI that Orla was just referring to, also jump in the top 3 as well when it comes to female. So some interesting differences that obviously you'll no doubt have a chance to scan when we share the deck afterwards. What I wanted to show, because I thought this was super interesting as well, is looking at the companies where there are really significant differences between female and male preferences. And some of the and if you're on this call and you're in some of these sort of companies, hope this is something that's super fascinating to you. L'Oreal's no real surprise, really. On the left-hand side, we can see there that the difference between male and female appreciation of L'Oreal is quite dramatic. They were 7th ranked in female in business and 85th ranked amongst men. So really way down the sort of lower reaches of the top 100 for men. 78 points of difference, and something we know well, because in certain countries in the world we've supported L'Oreal with particular male targeting. I think looks like Ireland might be another place where that might be necessary as well. Pennies as well. I don't know whether anybody from Pennies has joined us today, but also big female association, really successful with regard to female attractiveness, but less so with men. And you see some other ones as there. And maybe it's the women that are holding up that appreciation for Aer Lingus as well, because you can see there Aer Lingus in the top 12 for business, whereas in men they're top 3rd and 30th position. In engineering, there's some differences there we can see as well. Notably, most is HSE. Some little movements further down the order that I think are fascinating as well. We see Roche. Much more appreciation by women. Adobe as well, which is a really interesting one. Difficult to put a finger on it, but again, probably talks to the fact that some organizations, particularly in tech, have really been working on how do they embrace young female talent better. And that would probably demonstrate that Adobe are making good movements in that area to tell the right story to those people. And then you see on the right-hand side, specifically with tech, we can see some interesting one there. PepsiCo, massive movements in tech. I know PepsiCo obviously investing a lot in Ireland, so that's a really interesting one. Huawei, very much more focused on appreciated by women rather than men. Again, really interesting. Again, both people from local discipline will probably understand that. And Kerry Group as well, very much focused on more with females. And we see Adobe there on merit as well. Again, significant difference between female and male attraction. So I spy a very strong female campaign from Adobe to student audiences in this last year, and possibly also from Airbnb, and as looking across those as well. And then looking at the other way around, companies that are more appreciative with males. And what we see is some of the things here that Carolina mentioned earlier with regard to particularly the business students on the left-hand side. We see this high performance from banks. In fact, the male versus female appreciation of banks is quite significant in all areas. We're seeing a big movement there. Excuse me, that should have been a plus on the J, but we see JP Morgan 5th amongst men, 32nd amongst female. Morgan Stanley 14th amongst men, 59th amongst female, and Barclays 37 and 89. So big differences there as well.
And maybe the men are more into the betting and into the odds than female as well. As Paddy Power, top 20 amongst males, very probably quite a male-focused brand, I think, a lot of the time as well. In engineering, not as significant, we noticed in engineering. Actually, the differences weren't quite, and I think maybe that goes back to what we saw earlier about more engineering firms being appreciated for certain things by females. That probably means the gap is sort of closing in that respect. But you can see some examples there. GE more appreciated by men than females, and Samsung as well. So interesting one there. We saw Kerry Group amongst tech more appreciated by females, but amongst engineering more appreciated by men. So interesting one there. And then on the right hand side, you can see Paddy Power being the most dramatic difference between male and female appreciation in regards to attraction, but also again we see some banks showing some. As I mentioned earlier, banks have done very well actually in the tech audiences, but still much more appreciation by male tech talent in the next generation of talent coming through than in female. And as we saw the game company do very well earlier, Activision Blizzard, top 10 with men, 22nd with female. So does that mean that more men play the games than the female? Who knows? But there you go. So just some interesting things we wanted to kind of show who's doing well in the female versus male rankings as well. So look, thanks everyone. Thanks to my colleagues Carolina and Dennis from Universum for sharing some really good insights on some of the trends. We probably will do something to revisit that in the coming weeks, maybe over a webinar, and look at some of the detailed trends, because hopefully you'll find those super interesting. And thank you also to Sarah for her commentary on the Irish rankings at the top there, and also to you, Orla. And I'll pass back to you to close us off for today, and thank you for your insights as well.
No, thank you, Steve. And I suppose maybe before we wrap up, what would you say would be the kind of the top takeaways for our attendees on the webinar today?
I think one of the things that we've got to learn about graduate engagement is that what we've always talked about is graduate programs, graduate careers, very hard factors around, where you're going to go, what the career is going to look like, what are the, it's almost like needing to prove that it's going to be a good place to work, that you're going to have a career there. That's often been the way. It's kind of, be secure here, oh, good career here, you have progression. The big thing for me now is the message needs to be softened. We need not to lose that, but I think that we need to think about how do we embrace things about our organization that are different from our competitors to start with, and that's where a lot of our data kind of comes out about identifying unique elements that set you apart. But specifically, what do you do, almost like a care package in the organization? How do you support people on that career journey? How do you back people? How do you support a family? How do you provide security through that kind of journey? Because maybe some of those old tales about, yeah, you'll be here forever are not true anymore. There's too much movement and there's too much volatility. So I think it's more about how do you make people feel as much as how do you make people thrive. And I think that might be the big thing for me, I think, this year, almost particularly with the Irish market compared to other markets.
Really interesting. And I think everything you and your team took us through today as well was just fascinating, and given it's such a very different year as well, I think this was a really good session. So thanks very much for for leading this today, and to Dennis and Carolina as well. And maybe Steve, you might just let people know today how they can get a copy of the webinar, the presentation, and then to reach out directly to you then if they'd like to learn more about how Universum can help them with their employer branding strategy. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, so this deck will obviously go out afterwards, so you'll be able to get this, and also the snapshot for the Irish top 50s, top 100s for each of the audiences. So that will become available to you over the next kind of day or two.
yeah, look, all of this is built around the idea that we use this data to make good decisions about employer branding solutions and employer MVP solutions, and the way in which we target people through social media and the way in which we target talent. So please reach out to myself, Dennis, and Carolina if you want to try and understand what that means a little bit more. For many of the companies who are ranked, who you saw ranked, and who will be in the in those kind of top sort of 50s rankings, that we've got some data to share with you. Actually, we've got some sort of bit of information to share with you as to how you performed, how students appreciated through that questioning process that we asked earlier, and we'll also give you some ideas as to how what they're looking about you. We'll give you some sort of surface data that tells you a little bit on how students are perceiving your organization. So if you're in those kind of top 50s, that information is available. Reach out to me and the team. You can see we've got contact details on the screen there as well, to absolutely find out a little bit more about that. And obviously then we hopefully might be able to help you rise up those rankings as well through the next year too.
So Steve, myself and Sarah probably won't get to see you until the professional rankings, which are later in the year then.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the professional rankings in September, which is going to be really interesting. And we also anticipate that the movements might be even more distinct, because I think we probably also associate the fact that COVID and the pandemic has affected us as professionals more so than it would have done students. So yeah, look out for some really interesting story to come out of that, as we see through some of the early signs we've seen already.
Well, we look forward to catching up with you again then, and thanks everybody who attended today's webinar. Very much appreciate your time, and everybody stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, everyone.